about you in the past week since you started your channel. There is I have found myself referring people to our conversations, and I have said the cancer lady, and I'm like, smack.
That's
And
okay.
I don't want that to be the case. There's so much more to Jenny Hayworth than stage 4 cancer. And you made it very clear you're a woman living with cancer, not dying from cancer. And that was something that you gave a lot of hope to people, and I really appreciated that. So, all that being said, your new YouTube channel, which I already put a link to, and I will continue to link to it, is just amazing. It's
Well, thank
amazing.
you.
The content you're pumping out is second to none. And I would ask all my guys and the gals to check it out. So there's a link for it in the description, or you can check it out after our conversation today. How's life going for you, Jenny?
Well, yeah, really well, actually. I have been busy with the creation of this YouTube channel. So, it's a lot more work than I mean, I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but
Yeah,
it is. I'm quite busy with it. So I'm hoping that'll kind of like get easier as I go.
yeah.
But yeah, everything's going really well. So
Okay, good,
can't
good.
complain.
All right, can't complain.
It
That
wouldn't
is
do any good anyway, right?
right, right. Okay, so I'm going to ask you the questions that I've asked women for 7 years in a row now. And they are the same questions that I ask every woman. Now, most of the women that I've asked these questions to are single women who hope maybe one day to be married, or widowed women. You are a married woman with 6 children. So
Hmm.
you're going to be your perspective is that of a married woman with 6 children and a husband. And I think since, in the past year, when mortality has become an issue, in the same way that divorce makes a man stop, breathe, and think, I am sure the mortality issues have made you stop, breathe, and think. And it's very obvious in your shorts and in your videos. Just blows my mind. I just can't say good enough things about the insight and the wisdom that is coming out of your mouth. It's amazing. Let me ask you this. Do you think that the mortality issue has changed the way you think and talk in the past year? I already know what your answer is, but let me hear it in your words.
Yes. I would say it helped me focus, but a lot of the things that I have already learned through my Catholic faith, I don't know if those have necessarily changed. I would just say that like I'm better able to kind of like process that and get that information out to other people. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and kind of there's more urgency. I would say, like for me personally in my spiritual growth, there is a sense of urgency um, that I don't feel like I necessarily have the time that I assumed I did before, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Okay.
I totally get that because I know as I have been open to marriage, the last relationship I had, we were talking about children. I'm doing the math. I'm like, okay, if I start now, I'll have my next child by the time I'm 63. And then I start calculating how old I will be when I graduate from high school. You just start
Hmm.
doing the math. But
Hmm.
I'm assuming that I have 30 to 40 years. Stupid assumption because nobody really knows. But I'm assuming, and I plan everything according to the fact that I have 30 to 40 years left. Nothing has come in my life that has interrupted that assumption. You had something come into your life that interrupted the I'm going to have a long, happy life and 10 kids.
Right. Right. For sure. I mean, I will say I'm a singer, so I sing funerals all the time, and I'm a little bit perhaps more aware of mortality than the average person. Just because I've worked with dead people. Like I love the dead. I have a devotion to the souls in purgatory because I like to say that they just aren't annoying anymore. And so that's terrible, right? But like they're not annoying dead people.
It's
So
funny.
praying for dead people is
Right,
great because all you're doing is good things for them.
right.
Um, so I wouldn't say, I mean, like, yes, like, did it smack me in the face and did my diagnosis kind of light a fire under my butt? Yes. Have I always contemplated death? Yes. So, again, it's more about like a laser focus, I would say for me personally. Like, I was just sort of like, oh, I know what I need to do, but I don't want to do it yet. I don't, does, yeah. So But yeah, it makes you think. And I do think people, when they get a diagnosis like this, like they kind of go one of two ways. Like either they grab it and try to do something positive with it, or they run away from it. And so I'm hoping that I'm grabbing it and doing something positive, and like I'm like fervently praying for that. So anyway, that is that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to start with question number one. I'm going to ask
Okay.
you this. Now, keep in mind the the bulk of my subscribers, viewers are from about 18 to 35. That's where the largest amount exists.
Okay.
All throughout, over 220,000 subscribers, there's about 12 to 13,000 women that range in age from age, college age gals to women in their 30s that are hoping to get married to widows to older women. There's a wide range. I have several women that I have received messages from over the years that are young, like my daughter's age, that are looking
Mhm.
for a husband. And they're just coming right out. I allowed them, I give them the freedom and the platform to say, I'm looking for a husband. I want to have children. What do? I can't find any good men out there. And I take that very seriously. So I have had many of those conversations, and they're like daughters to me. That's how I choose to view it. So, as a woman who is married, has children, what is the role of a woman? It's a two-part question in family and in society.
Okay, so I would say the role of women in society, and I think maybe your viewers are not going to like this answer, because I actually think it's the same as the role of men, because I think that we are created to have union with God. And because of our particular nature, based on our physiology and like the various virtues that we are sort of born with because of our natural sexual characteristics, I think that the way that we display that love or the way that we get to God is going to be different. So in society, and this is like the proper Christian society that I'm thinking about, not society that we are like, this is my ideal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so the ideal is that a woman will seek God. And the way that she does that is through her femininity and like these natural virtues that women are given. So her role could be a nun, she could be a teacher, she could be a mother, she could be a wife, she could be any number of things as long as that is her focus. Because I don't think that all women are actually called to be wives and mothers, like not even a little bit. I would even like go as far as to say that I think probably half of the women in the world are called to that.
And the other half are on hormonal birth control.
No, I mean I think ultimately there there are a good number of women that are called to a spiritual path, like a good number of women, maybe not half, but like a third easily. Like at the height of Christendom before the Protestant Reformation, a third of Europeans were in holy orders, like a full third
Hmm.
were celibate. Um, And so I don't think that women are naturally necessarily able to or given the gifts of being a mother and a wife. Um,
A gift. It's a gift. Being a mother and a wife is a gift.
I
Hmm.
think so. I think
Explain that.
so. So because being a wife and a mother requires, okay, being a nun obviously does too, or like being a celibate, like a consecrated virgin, okay, that obviously requires a tremendous degree of virtue. But being a wife and a mother requires like a level of submission to God in relationship to your husband that can be very difficult for many women to handle.
Yes.
And so the people I know who are nuns or the people I know who are consecrated virgins or living in some sort of community where they're not necessarily like taking vows. Um, but many of them will say that the idea of submitting to their husbands is like it's easier for them to submit directly to God and then to submit to their superior, who would be another woman or and then ultimately their spiritual director, who would be a priest. And I will say, like, as a woman, it's much easier to me for me to submit to my spiritual director, a priest. Like, if he tells me to do something, I'm like, oh, I'll do it, right? So I see that. So
Wait, he never says make me a sandwich, does he?
no, not my spiritual director.
Okay.
I've never
Okay.
even my spiritual director. I've never even talked to him outside of the confessional. Like, I see this
Right.
man. He doesn't even know what I look like. He could bump into me on the street. He wouldn't know where I was. But I listened to
Right.
him.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, so I think that that's kind of a hard thing to hear because I think right now in our society, because we have lost our, and I'm talking about Western culture, and I'm assuming everybody here is from the West. I know that in Eastern cultures it's totally different, but we are, we're in America. This is a Western country, and our framework is that we have these, like the history of the West, we've always had a tradition of monasticism and a tradition of women not getting married and going off into a temple, whether she was a Roman or like an ancient Hebrew, or if she was living in medieval Europe. There's always been a space for women to not be mothers and wives. And so I do not think as a Christian that every woman is called to marriage. So
Excellent. Okay. Question number 2. Do you think, well, here, this is the question that I would ask single women. Do you think you'd be a good wife and why? But I will modify that question and say, are you a good wife and why? And what is the definition of a good wife and why? And this is for the ladies that are watching this.
um, I think I'm often a good wife, but sometimes I'm not. I'm not
Okay.
always a good wife. I mean, okay, I'll say this. Over the course of our marriage, like if my husband looks back on our marriage, I would say he would say, yeah, I have a really great wife. Does that mean I'm always a good wife? No. I am attacked spiritually like anybody else. And sometimes I have an inappropriate reaction to my own emotions in relationship to my husband and my children. Like I'm not some consistently loving, devoted, I mean, I'm devoted, obviously, but like I'm not some consistently loving wife at all times. Um, but of course with marriage I think these things are just like sort of an overall, like if you're looking at like the broad picture. But yeah, I mean there's times when I'm like I'm not nice, like that happens in a marriage. And I think what we have to do is ask ourselves in those moments, like what are we trying to get out of our behavior, right? So if you're in a marriage and you're angry with your spouse, let's say like your husband does something that he probably didn't even mean to make you angry, but because of your preconceived notions of how he should treat you, you're going to have an overreaction. And in those moments, you've got to like, take a step back and be like, why am I fighting with this man right now? Am I fighting with him because I'm trying to get a union with him? Or am I fighting with him because I'm trying to win a boxing match? Because
Mm.
that's, if your idea of marriage is that you're going to get what you want, and that is in opposition to your spouse and that you have to somehow win a fight, then that's where I think people really spin out. And do I do that sometimes? Absolutely, I do that sometimes. Sometimes I am so prideful and difficult, and my poor husband is like the most virtuous man, and he doesn't rise to the occasion. I will say, like, I'm fiery, he is not. He does not rise to the occasion. um, but yeah, I mean sometimes I can be a difficult wife, absolutely. I would be lying if I said I wasn't. um,
Right.
you know, so yeah, I
Do
don't
you
know.
think, since the cancer diagnosis, do you think that you have become more difficult or has it tempered some of that? Or let me ask you this, rather than putting those words in your mouth, how has that affected you? Do you answer this question differently now with that diagnosis than before the diagnosis? What do you think?
Well, I will say one of the things I said to my husband when I was first diagnosed was that I regretted any fight I had ever been in with him.
Mm.
Because in that moment I was like, what? And look, we do not have a volatile marriage. We are very stable. We are a very stably married like couple, and people around us would say that we are, extremely happy. So I'm being very vulnerable in this because I think it's important to be honest with these things, and I don't want to paint a picture that's not true, right?
Right.
Um, but I will say, yeah, like after my diagnosis, I was like, I regret every stupid fight I ever had with you. I said to him, because like we're looking at this, because I want all of our memories to be happy, but also like what were we fighting about? I mean, I would get into fights with my husband over the stupidest subjects. And deep down inside, like these kind of arguments that we would get into are not based on anything that man did to me. It is entirely based on my own emotional turmoil and the things that I am lacking in my relationship with God. So
Mm.
nothing he's ever done to me is, none of my reactions to him are because of anything that he has done, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's my own plank. Like I have a plank in my eye, and
Yeah.
that's frustrating. And so then I lash out and try to like get, the whatever his little the little flecks in his eye with like a giant plank in my face. So
It's funny. When you had said that in an earlier video on your channel, I'm not sure if it was a short or in a video, when you talked about the plank coming out of an eye. I remember there was a comedy routine back in the 80s. There was this Christian comedy team. When I find it, I'll send it to you. And they talked about the plank in someone's eye, and just like picture like a 6-foot plank coming out of your eye. And like when you turn to the left, it knocks things off the shelf. Go to the right, it's like smashing glasses and things are flying off the table. And they said when you view it that way, like it's a literal plank coming out of your eye, you start to say, oh, wow, my opinion and what I'm dealing with is affecting people outside of me. Like you don't have a private plank.
no. No, and I think it's funny because, you know, the wisdom of scripture, it's like we all know these stories, right? We hear them, we're like, oh, the gospel, the gospel. You know, we all know these, we all know what Jesus said. I mean, I'm assuming most of your readers or your listeners are pretty well acquainted with the Bible.
Yes.
But then you go back and you meditate on these and it's like, oh yeah, like he's literally talking about me right now, right? Or not right now, but like in a fight. Because that wisdom is so deep and it's so profound and it touches you so deeply, but it's something that you have to keep going back to. It's not something that you just understand in the moment. You're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like I should work on myself. Like, no, like you should work on yourself like every single day. You have to work on your own virtue. So, yeah. So have I been, I guess the question was, have I been a good wife? I hope so. I mean, I hope so. But I have a lot of, it's a never ending process. It's a relationship. It never stops. So, I'm hoping to be the best wife I can in the future and today, right? So anyway, that's my answer.
Excellent. Male-female relationship dynamics are at an all-time low. Cynicism is at an all-time high. What are some possible solutions?
Okay, well, I think, and you and I have talked about this a little bit. I think one major problem in male-female relationships and relationships with anyone is that our culture no longer systematically teaches the process of becoming a virtuous person to children. So virtue, at its, if you're going to boil down what virtue really is, it is having an emotion, understanding the emotion you are having. So correctly identifying how you feel, and then using your intellect to decide how you will proceed instead of the emotion driving your behavior. When I see divorced people, and this is not to say that this happens to all divorced people, but every divorce I've ever seen, one of those people lacks virtue. Usually both, but not always. Sometimes one is highly virtuous and the other one is a total disaster. And so when our responses to our emotions are what they typically are in our culture, which is, first of all, we can't identify what the emotion is. People don't identify their emotions. And then we lash out based on how we feel as if that is a reliable source of information. You're going to have a miserable marriage and you're going to have a miserable time relating to the opposite sex. So I think the solution would be training people in virtue and teaching people how to withstand a certain degree of suffering. I think the problem is that everybody lacks virtue now. I mean, like, this isn't even something we talk about. Like, this isn't even approached in any way, shape, or form. We've boiled our culture down to social justice, which is important. Like, it is important that we have a sense of social justice, that people are not being mistreated on a large scale. But beyond that, that is kind of the only thing we are forced to take personal responsibility for, is like the way that we treat people in large numbers. There's very little attention in children and in school to their own sense of virtue and their own sense of like self-discipline and their own awareness, because we have to know ourselves, their own awareness of their emotional world. And so that would be the solution. We'd have to like completely start over and train these kids from a very young age. And because I do think that men and women got along better 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And I see that in every bit of literature I read, or anything that, any opera, any play. There were conflicts. And certainly there were some people that were quite despondent about the state of, marriage and things like that. But today, or the state of, male-female dynamics. But today, people are furious with the opposite sex, like absolutely furious, women and men. They hate each other. And it's a huge problem. And I think it's a lack of virtue.
Excellent. What are relationship and or marriage deal breakers?
Um, what I would tell my daughters is that, and my sons, I would say that I would never marry somebody of a different religious background. I lived in a mixed marriage. My husband, like I converted to Catholicism, so we were the same religion when we met. But then I became Catholic, and he eventually converted also, and we worked that out. But I would say from the outset, if you are a devout Christian or something like that, you need to marry somebody that is the same religion. Um,
Did
and I
things get
don't.
better?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Did things get better? Did things improve? I mean, did it make things better
When
when
he became
he?
Catholic, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, I
Okay.
would say we okay, so we got to a point where we were understanding each other. He converted a couple months ago. Um, so we got to a point where we understood each other, and he was going to church with the kids, and he never asserted, like, he was fine with not using birth control like we did NFP and things like that. Um, I wouldn't say our marriage necessarily improved, but I would say that my emotional state improved because I was no longer shouldering the burden of teaching my children the Catholic faith without a Catholic husband. And now my husband is the head of our household spiritually. I think it's very difficult for a woman to be the head of the household in a spiritual sense. And when you are the only one who, when the woman is the only one who has a religious belief or is Catholic, like, you're going to have to assume that responsibility, but it's not a natural place for a woman to be. Does that make sense?
It makes
Um,
a lot of sense.
so I would say that I'm calmer and like I feel more at peace with the faith or with my own, like I'm more able to focus on God and a little bit less, frustrated by that. It is not to say that I'm so happy that I'm married to my husband, and I am, absolutely the struggles we had when I changed religions and he stayed the same. We both learned from that, and I would have it no other way. That was God's intention. And I absolutely, I'm so happy that I was married to him those years. But my friends and the people I see that are in a mixed marriage that go into the marriage with a mixed marriage, I think that that's very difficult. And I think it's harder than being married to somebody of a separate, like a different race or a different ethnicity or any of those things. Like, I think that your religious beliefs are what really hold you together as a couple. Um, so that would be one of the deal breakers. And I would say, like, I hate to give, deal breakers that are hard and fast, because I do believe that the human soul is capable of such profound growth that anything in somebody's past can be let loose of. And so I don't necessarily want to say that, to my daughters or my sons, that somebody with a difficult past should be disregarded, because that person could be a fantastic spouse, especially if they worked on whatever issues that led them to some difficult behaviors or bad behaviors. But I would say that in general, um, if you don't like your in-laws, tread carefully. I have a really good relationship with my mother-in-law. Um, she is such a wonderful woman, and I love her so deeply, and that has been such a benefit to our marriage. I would tread carefully with that. I would look at the way that your potential spouse's parents relate to each other. And if your potential spouse is not aware of any issues in their parents' marriage, so I'm not saying if their parents have a bad marriage, you should not marry this person. But if they think that's normal and they don't say to you, yeah, I know that my parents have this difficulty. I have worked on myself and my own virtue so that that is not my knee-jerk reaction, is not the same as my mother's or my father's. Um, but I do think you have to pay attention to family of origin and like the things that kids learned growing up, and the stability of their household. In the in the Catholic Church, I think this has changed, but there was a time when a man was not allowed to be a priest if he was from a broken home or if his parents were not married when he was conceived, or I mean, like when he was born. They wouldn't accept men into the priesthood because they were worried about their lack of virtue. And from my understanding, it's very difficult for children to grow up with virtue if they're in a turbulent household. That children need like a baseline of like a pretty peaceful environment in order to grow. Um, that being said, can people come back from a difficult childhood? Absolutely. But if they haven't expressed that, if they're just like, oh, well, that's how people should be, then I would tread very carefully, because your spouse will probably act a lot like their mother or their father. Um, And so, it's not like a deal breaker, but I would say that's something that you really need to pay attention to. And then the last deal breaker that I would say is a hard, like for me and my children, like what I will tell them is if your spouse and any part of them believes that a marriage can be dissolved, do not marry that person. If they think divorce is an outlet, do not marry that person. And obviously, if they ever are physically abusive or verbally, all of that stuff. I mean, this is like, I'm
Yeah.
talking like normal relationships, right?
Yeah.
If anybody ever hits you, if you're a woman and a man ever shows any shred of violence, like just leave because it'll probably get worse. The more stressed out that man gets. So anyway, those are my deal breakers, I would say.
Okay. Excellent.
Oh,
We have one.
wait,
Go ahead.
one more. I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
one more. I would not marry somebody with debt. It's hard enough to
Excellent.
be married, no debt. Everything needs to be paid off. They have to have some financial discipline. And if they don't, you need to drag them to somebody that will teach them financial discipline. That is absolutely a deal breaker. Yeah. So anyway, okay.
Okay. Here we have a comment from one of the people in the chat. My hat's off to Jenny Hayworth. Good job. You're a dutiful Christian wife and mother. My wife and mother of our 5 children. I lost to cancer 2.5 years ago, and it's been challenging and very hard. And he's been watching this channel for a while now, and he's in the chats most of the time when I go on the air. What would be your advice to him?
As a widower, um, is he seeking another
You
partnership?
I believe he is, but you have thought about your husband being a widower almost
Mhm.
as much as actually that was the bridge for our communication initially was that you were thinking about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my husband, what's he going to do? So I think that's how you and I bonded originally. So here we have a guy in that situation, lost his wife 2.5 years ago. You've thought a lot about widowers. What would you tell him?
I would tell him to reach out to his community if he belongs to a church. If he doesn't belong to a church, join one and put out feelers through his friend groups. The widowers I know that have successfully remarried, their friends kind of provided that for them because I think like for a widower they can be a little bit unmoored and it's hard for them sometimes to see what's right for them. Of course he's 2 years out, so he's probably over like the like massive amounts of grief, or like that, like he's functional hopefully. But I think I would absolutely reach out in that case and almost have an arranged marriage because I think a second marriage is much more about healthy companionship and like than it is. He obviously doesn't probably want to restart his family. He already has 5 children. He probably doesn't want somebody, so he's looking for something that's totally different in a second wife than he would be in his first wife. And I would absolutely like reach out to whoever he has in his world that he trusts and just say,
Brilliant.
hey,
That
help.
is brilliant advice. Absolutely brilliant. That never occurred to me. Have an arranged marriage for your second marriage, or as much of an arrangement as possible.
Yeah, with your friends and community. Okay, so I'm not saying
Yeah.
like, a mail order bride or something. I mean, maybe
Right.
that would
Right.
work. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. What would you tell the ladies? There are going to be ladies watching this. I know, even though it's a men's channel, they come to this channel by the thousands. I still can't figure that out. But let me ask you this question. How can a woman attract, how can a single woman attract the kind of man that she desires? Since men and women are in the same boat, but we rarely talk about it, we'd rather fight. We call it the battle of the sexes. We use the language of war to talk about relationships. And I'm so tired of the war language, and I'd rather come from a place of joy. What can a woman do to attract or find the type of man that she desires?
Well, okay, so this is a little bit tricky for me because I met my husband when I was 19 years old. And so I don't have a lot of experience of meeting men in the wild. Like, so we
In the
met in
wild.
college. Yeah, like
Yeah.
we met in college, and dating in
Yeah.
college is totally different because you're with a friend group and like there's a
Yeah.
lot less pressure, whatever. So I would say though
You mean he
that
did? You mean he didn't come up to you like in some bar and say, "Hey, you remind me of my first wife"?
no, no, we actually met in church
Okay.
choir, which is like so innocent and cute. Um,
Right.
so I would say for single women right now, and first of all, and this is going to sound a little crazy, dress modestly, because a virtuous man is going to immediately avert his eyes from women that are dressed in a way that is sexually suggestive, because he practices custody of the mind, custody of the eyes, rather, both of those things. So I would say that's the first thing. Do not try and lure a man in with your body, because you will, not that these men are judgmental. You're not repelling men who are virtuous because of their judgmentalness. It's because they literally won't look at you because they're worried they'll be tempted to sin and lust. So, and I've seen this in my life with men who have a high degree of virtue. If a woman walks in the room that has, like, everything is exposed, they immediately, like, they just turn their eyes away. And so you will become invisible to virtuous men if you are displaying your body inappropriately. So that's the first thing I would say.
Say
I
that
would
again.
say
Say that again.
you will become invisible to virtuous men if you display your body inappropriately.
Okay.
Okay. So right off the bat, if you are somebody that is, you're going to attract a certain type of man if you are dressed a certain way. And do you want to be linked with that man for all eternity? I mean, on earth, do you want that to be your husband, the guy that's like, oh, look at that woman and her, her buxom body. Like, I'm going to go talk to her, right? You don't want that to be your husband, because he's going to do that with every other woman he sees. So that's the first thing that I would say for women in that are,
Coco
actively
Chanel.
seeking.
Coco Chanel said, when a woman is poorly dressed, you notice the dress. When a woman is impeccably dressed, you notice the woman.
Right. I would think that was true, right? And then from there, I would say that there are many shared activities that people can do to find a partner. And so again, like I'm a church person, but joining church young adult groups, like those often have a lot of single people that are looking for somebody who, is interested in marriage. And even if you're not religious, you can always join one of the more like open-minded, maybe Protestant churches that are more mainstream, if they have those kinds of activities. So I would get out and try to meet people. But the way you're going to meet people is usually through a shared, like I have a friend that always says the way to meet good friends is to do hard things together. So I would consider joining like a church group that does mission work, not mission work like spreading the love of, spreading the gospel, but mission work going into houses and repainting them, or tutoring children or things like that. And I think that you'll find people that you kind of bond with because you're doing a shared activity. And I think for men, that shared activities really bring them close to women. And that like seems to be a theme that I see with men, that they want to do things with women. They want to work alongside of them. And so I would kind of go into the man's world in that way. Like, what is it that they are seeking? And then also, I would be totally honest with any man that you're dating and just say, look, I want to be a wife and a mother. And just say it on the first date. Just say, I don't necessarily want to be your wife. I don't necessarily want to be the mother of your children, but ideally that's what I'm looking for. Don't go into a relationship afraid to be honest about things like this. All right. So if you're like, oh, but he'll run away, he'll be scared. It's like, well, then good, goodbye. Like, you just filtered out another man. There's
Yeah. See you
millions of
later.
them. Yeah, there's millions of them. The problem is there's too many men. There's too many women. You got to get through as many as possible. And if you can do that on the first date, great.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and just be clear, I don't want to marry you necessarily, because that is weird to be like, hey, I want to get married, but like to
Right.
someone.
Right.
Anyway, so I would say that, and also temper. Like, I think with women sometimes they have this laundry list of things that they refuse. Like men, they'll refuse to date for the most ridiculous reasons, like their height or how much money they make or the way they dress, or all of these silly, silly things that women um, they can get really picky. And it's like, don't be so picky, because the height of your husband will not matter after you have birthed 6 children and he's stuck by your side. Like that this doesn't matter anymore, right? By the way, my husband is 6'4", so I shouldn't be like talking about this. I did marry a really tall guy, but
Right. Right.
it is like, those are these ridiculous things that women do, and they're just making their lives more difficult. So
And how tall are you?
5'6".
Okay. Okay. That's average woman height in America.
Yeah. It's about
Yeah.
average, yeah. But
Yeah.
I do have a very tall husband. So
Okay. So let me ask you this. I know when guys speak amongst one another, we're pretty simple. Like, and it has almost become tongue in cheek. And because this is a guy's channel and I speak to guys and I don't change my language when I talk to a woman and bring her on the show, guys amongst each other, we joke around and say, I want a woman to, what do they say? Keep my stomach full and my balls empty. And I'm like, well, okay, dude, that's something. I get that. I get that. But after your stomach is full, after the other thing happens, you still have to live with a person. So that's all she needs to do. My God, you could hire that out.
Mhm.
What can a wife provide that a purchased wife can't provide?
Um, I would say that a wife, especially a virtuous wife, will assist a man in his journey towards God.
Helpmate.
So, yes, so her job as a Christian is to assist her husband on his spiritual journey. Um, and the way that looks is unique to each marriage. And so I have a friend who's a priest that has done a bit of exorcisms. And one thing he said to me is that sin is shockingly boring. Shockingly boring. Everybody sins the same way, and all demons are exactly the same. Okay. And if you think about it, like even when you see like a marriage fall apart, it's always the same story, right? Like everybody who has a divorce story, it's like a clone. Like every time you read a divorce story, it's always the same.
They all fall into similar categories. Yes.
Yes, yes, it's always the same thing because sin is extremely boring. It's not creative. Like demons don't create anything. They don't have a creative power. Humans have creative power, and when they are virtuous, when a woman is virtuous, she will be able to respond to the needs of her husband in an incredibly creative and beautiful way. And happy marriages where the spouses are seeking God will not all look the same. Okay. And I have a great example of this if I can, I hope I'm not
Please.
talking too long. Okay.
Please.
So there's this woman who's an incorrupted, she's not a saint yet, nobody's canonized her, but she's a nun who is incorrupted. And for people that don't know, that means her body didn't decay. And it's a long story, but anyway, this woman's been in the ground for years and like her body is pristine. And so all the Catholics in America are freaking out about this. Okay. So I bought her book. She was the prioress of a convent. She's a nun. And in her book, there's a story about her mother and her father and their relationship. This woman is African American. Both of her parents are Black, and they were living in St. Louis. They were Catholic, and they were living in St. Louis during the 1930s. And when things were very difficult for Black families, obviously, they still had like hard segregation in the schools and things like that, which I guess they did in Missouri. I didn't know that until I read this book, but they did. And one of the stories she told was that her mother, who before she was married was a school teacher and a very successful one at that. And so she had an ability to earn income. Okay. She got married and she became a stay-at-home mother because that was very important to her. She felt that that was her calling. Her husband then loses his job in the 30s during the Depression. And everyone in their community told her to go back to work. They're like, you need to go back to work or you need to get on government handouts because your husband is unemployed. And what she said to everyone was, I cannot do that to my husband because that will kill him. That will wound him beyond measure. And so she refused to earn an income and she simply cut costs as much as possible in her household. And her husband eventually became employed again and everything was okay. And the reason I'm telling this story is that for some people, that's crazy. They're like, why wouldn't you go earn income for your family when your husband is down on his luck? But in this woman who had a high degree of virtue, she knew what her husband needed in that moment. She knew because she wasn't blinded by her own sin. She had clarity and she knew exactly how to respond in that situation. And now her daughter is an incorrupt saint, potentially, has not been canonized yet, but her daughter it reached such a degree of holiness, and this is our understanding in the Catholic Church, that her body is not decaying. So I think when it comes to what women can provide for men beyond simply food and sex, they can provide them with a level of emotional support that no one else can give them, but also a level of spiritual support that no one else can give them. But they have to be a woman of an extremely high degree of virtue in order to be that dynamic. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. This morning's show, I called it the virtuous relationship or the virtuous marriage. We've heard about virtuous men. Proverbs talks about a virtuous woman. Is there such a thing? Well, I think there is. Is there such a thing, in your opinion, as a virtuous relationship, a virtuous marriage? And
Yes.
how so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the understanding of marriage in the Catholic Church certainly that would be considered like if you're following all of the teachings of the faith, like you would have a virtuous marriage. And I would say a virtuous marriage is one where the couple independently, like the people independently, realize when they're under some sort of spiritual attack or they're under some sort of demonic influence. And I know I'm like talking about demons is probably kind of freaky for people on your show, but like these are these like little creatures that are always there whispering in your ear and telling you to do
Right.
things to destroy your marriage. Okay. And they have free reign right now in our society. Nobody's even trying to stop them. Not even trying. Um, in a virtuous marriage, each member of the marriage recognizes when they are being influenced by something other than their intellect. Okay. And it's not that your emotions don't matter. They absolutely matter. And you have to recognize your emotions. You have to process them. It's that if you are led by your deep feelings or like your immediate emotional response to things, you will lash out in inappropriate ways. You will do things that are inappropriate, and you will damage your marriage. And so, when both people in a marriage can recognize those tendencies and they really get to know themselves and their emotional world and how they respond to that, yes, you absolutely can have a virtuous marriage. And I think that there is kind of like a space between a couple where there's like this, there's the man and the woman, and then there's this like space in between, and that can have virtue, that space in between. Um, I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does.
Hopefully.
When I
Okay.
talk to men, I always ask them, what are the biggest challenges in your marriage or relationship? I'm going to ask you, what is the biggest challenge of a woman in a relationship and or marriage?
I think the biggest challenge for women, um, okay, this is going to be like a slightly long answer, and I'm sorry, but in today's society, because marriage is not necessarily needed in an economic sense, so the obviously women can receive support for children that she conceives out of wedlock, um, and she can work, and like women and men don't need to be married in the way that they used to be. So everyone in our culture, like before we had all this technology and easy access to goods and food, um, everyone lived in community. Nobody was alone, right? So everyone either lived with their parents, they lived, I mean, if you're a Catholic, you lived in a monastery. If you were married, you lived with your spouse, but nobody ever lived alone in an apartment somewhere. Okay. You had to be in some sense of community. You depended on other people. Um, or like men would have boarding houses where somebody would, a woman would, actually my grandmother ran a boarding house. And so she would like take care of single men. She would cook for them and do their laundry and stuff like that. But nobody was ever, so we had to have somebody there to do this work because physical work was so all consuming that your entire day was spent doing physical labor. You had to be married or in a community. Today, we still recognize how important marriage is because it is important as an institution because children have to be raised in a stable marriage. That is the bedrock of society, and children who are not raised in a stable marriage face so many problems. I think they face so many problems we don't even begin to know because so many children are raised in a broken home that we don't know the effects of it because we don't even have a good control arm, right? It's kind of like smoking where everybody had lung cancer but we didn't know why because everybody was smoking. It's the same thing. Everybody's emotionally wounded because everybody was raised, so many people were raised in a bad home. So marriage is incredibly important, and we do feel that, we know that. But what we've turned marriage into is an emotional contract. So all of the benefits of marriage that we talk about in our culture are the emotional benefits of marriage. And so for a woman, that is kind of her world. That's what women bring to marriage, right? And so if a woman is in a marriage where she does not feel emotionally supported, if she feels that her husband shuts down or ignores her or is not fully there to support her, she will be in a high degree of distress in her marriage. And I think the reason is because women, first of all, a woman that truly loves a man, deeply and truly loves a man, will love that man exclusively till the day she dies. Like once a woman is in that space, it never goes away. And I've seen this with my grandmothers who were fiercely devoted to their husbands. Those women called out to their husbands on their deathbed. Okay. That's who they were calling out to. And my
Wow.
grandfathers had been, yeah,
Wow.
they had been dead one of my grandfathers had been dead for 40 years, and my grandmother called out to him. Okay. She was so fiercely devoted to him. she would have never even considered being with another man. And she got a lot of offers. She was gorgeous. She was gorgeous. But so for a woman, when a woman truly loves a man, it is such a deep and compelling love that it puts her in a vulnerable place because she will welcome all of the children that she received. And this, I'm talking like deep biology here. Okay, so
Yeah.
even though we have birth control, I mean, like she will in a natural marriage, if you are not using birth control, you get married at 18, you go into menopause at 50, we're talking like 16, 20 children that you will naturally conceive out of love for your husband because you would never reject him sexually because you love him so incredibly much, right?
My grandfather had 18 children. My great grandfather had 18 children.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's just crazy, right? Yeah. And so for a woman to be in an emotionally volatile marriage where she doubts her husband's emotional fidelity to her, that is the biggest challenge for women. And I think in today's society, because our emotional world is actually never explored, even though we all act like we're like psychologically aware, we're not. We're not. People used to be way more aware of their emotions. Like just read the Bible, read the Psalms. Okay, these people had a tap. They were like they had a window into their own souls and their emotional world and were able to express it. You see this all over literature in the 19th century and before. So we live in these like strange marriages where men are very closed off emotionally because they were raised, watching Gary Cooper or whoever, and they think that that's like what a man is. Like he doesn't ever feel anything, but he is feeling things. So he shuts down and the woman tries to pursue him and like get him to open up. And like he's from a divorced family and she's from a divorced family. And it's like this disaster. And so that I think is a woman's biggest challenge is to reconcile her need for this deep emotional connection with the realities of the world. Okay. And I think women can do that. I don't think all women are going to be in a marriage where they're passionately, deeply in love with a man. But I think women can get past that need for just like this deep and profound emotional support. I think they can get past it if they work on their own virtue. So that is the answer to your question with that.
That is great. Well, we have been on the air for almost an hour. It seems like 5 minutes. It went by so fast. Uh, this talk, I wanted it to be kind of like our offline talks. I remember that one phone call that we had, and the only thing I could say was this should have been a podcast. So this is a continuation of that because we have very productive talks, and I'm really happy that you're able to do this. The next time we talk, I want to talk about how to raise boys, how to raise girls, and what you can contribute to that. I have a lot of single moms and dads out here. I have a lot of married moms and dads that follow me. And I would love to get your opinion on that the next time we talk. But I just want to thank you for your time this morning. It's been fantastic. And how can people find you, Jenny?
Oh, like on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, you have a new YouTube channel.
I have a YouTube channel. I'm like a little bit on Instagram and Facebook, although my Facebook page is closed. But I do have a public profile on Instagram. It's just Jenny Haworth. So yeah, and I have a YouTube channel. I think it's Jenny Haworth. You'll link it, right? Like I don't even know. I
Yeah,
haven't like
yeah.
promoted myself at all this way. So yeah, but I'd love if people want to come watch these videos. I mean, they're super Catholic, so I don't want to offend anybody who's Protestant or something like that. But
I think that the Protestants that are part of my channel, we're all people of faith. We all love the Lord, and I don't think that that's a big deal. I mean, there are some commandos out there, and I get it. I understand the zeal and all of that. But so I would ask everyone to check out Jenny's channel. I'll put a link for it down below. And you are Jenny the Builder. You are still building. You have not given up. You are just building away with a sense of urgency now.
Yeah. So I don't know. Hopefully we'll build something. I'm just like hoping to draw more souls into the church. Because I think like we're at this crazy pendulum where like our society has swung so far that people are so confused that that I think this is like the time to grab them and be like, look, this is the answer. Like just, you know. So that's my goal.
And all right, so this just popped in my head. One last word and then we'll end it. What would you say to men? A lot of men come to this channel because of chaos and trauma that they've experienced. Speak. It's going to sound weird because there's men out there that say don't listen to anything a woman says because a woman is the one that caused your pain and your confusion and took half your shit and whatever. But speak to a hurt, broken man. Give him some hope.
Ooh. Um, I would say to hurt and broken men that first of all, suffering is good. That suffering makes you a better man, but you can't deny your suffering. So if God is handing you a cross, you actually have to pick it up and carry it. Meaning you can't just run away from your problems and try to, drink yourself into oblivion or I don't know, sleep with as many women as possible to like kind of numb your pain. You've got to face the pain. And once you actually pull in and like face that emotional pain and really internalize it and allow yourself to feel it and then offer that up to God and just say, God, this is the pain that you have given me and I will work with the pain. I think that it is possible for anyone to, to have a happy, successful life after they have done that work. Um, and as far as like women causing their pain, like it's women aren't causing your pain, Satan is causing your pain. And he tempts women in a way that will destroy relationships. And he tempts men in a way that will destroy relationships. And that is his ultimate goal because he doesn't want us having children and raising them in a way that they will serve God. So his ultimate goal is to tear you apart. And you can't think of like this as being necessarily women. It is the way that they respond to that temptation that makes them the way that they are when they sin against men. So that's what I would say. But I also understand why like men that have been terribly burned, why women don't want to go back into the dating pool. Like that makes perfect sense, especially in today's society, because there's no safety in marriage. Like you can just file for divorce and nobody's going to try to stop you. So that's a scary place to be for men.
Right.
So, I mean, I totally understand it. I have a lot of sympathy, but that's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. We will continue this conversation. Blessings to you, your husband, your kids, and we have a lot more to talk about. And I'll be sending people over to your channel to see what your thoughts on life are, which are I'm finding are increasingly more valuable to me. I've been addicted to your channel since you started
Oh,
it, and it's you kind of whet my appetite with our first conversation, and I just kept thinking, like for instance, even when we talked about raising boys and you talked about getting punched in the face, things like
mm-hmm.
that, like send your boys to boxing class, and
Yeah.
and then you recommended Father Chad Ripperger to me, and I can't stop watching the guy now, and it's like, man, this is a whole world that I've never even seen before,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely incredible. But thank you for that referral. I don't know if I meant to tell you that, or if I told you that already, but uh, listening to him has been absolutely amazing. And I probably should put a link to that video, that original video that you sent me with Father Chad. Just phenomenal.
Yeah. Father Ripperger is amazing. And I am blessed enough to have a very close friend who is a priest who actually studied under Father Ripperger. And so, and this priest, I know we have to go, but I just have to tell you this one thing. Like he said in seminary, Father Ripperger was one of his teachers. And he said in seminary, the seminarians just sat like this, like just because they were so in awe of Father Ripperger and his teaching ability. And after class, they'd all run up to him and have a million questions. And apparently, he never denied a student a question. And so he would say, okay, I have to go, but I'm taking down your phone number and I will call you and I will answer your question. And he did that for every single seminarian he ever taught. Like the man
Wow.
is, he's amazing. Father Ripperger is amazing. I highly recommend him for anybody who wants to understand our world right now. He's a fantastic priest. So anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
I love it. I love it. That was great. Thank you, Jenny, for your time, and we'll be
Yes.
talking soon. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.